I see the GOP talk all the time. They say, we need to end the weaponization of government. That's the opposite of what they should be saying. They should be saying, we are going to weaponize it against our enemies the way that they're doing this to us. Don't get mad, get even. And so we'll see. The ball's in their court. They need to put up or shut up. But you have to impeach somebody or start using this lawfare against prominent Democrats in red states or in Congress.
There is a prevailing sentiment on the right in America that if you can't beat the left at their own game, you should just join them. But not only should you join them, you should hijack their game and then try to re-engineer it to fit your own goals and desires. In fact, that's what you heard from that individual before me, who was a prominent Blaze TV commentator, an conservative internet personality, who was basically just advocating for a position that is becoming widely popular amongst conservatives in America. And part of me wonders, one of the reasons wonders why, but then the other part of me knows why. And the more I understand about this issue, the more concerned I get, because it really is telling of a particular kind of mentality that is pervasive in politics. Now, my friends, I've talked a lot about this particular problem on the right, the problem of adopting the left's tactics to win our own victories before, and I've also talked about the movement on the right to move away from the sort of 1980s, 1960s foundations of American conservatism represented by people like Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley and other folks that had an emphasis on the individual triumphing over the collective, but also the traditions within America being an important focal point to kind of mediate that distinction between the society and the government, all that kind of stuff. That was the foundations of American conservatism. Be not deceived. American conservatism was conceived to defeat communism. And in fact, that's how conservatism came about. Now, before that particular moment in history, the communist Cold War, there were, of course, other political movements. But what we know as conservatism today largely came about in the 60s. But as time has gone on, there have been moves to go away from the Reagan consensus, as it's called, this idea that libertarians or classical liberals and more traditionalists can work together to fight a common enemy, and to split apart and to pursue our own political projects. And the project that many of the traditionalists, who call themselves the post-liberals, and I'll explain what that means in a second, their project seems to be returning or converting America from an Enlightenment-era country, a country based on the freedom of the individual, a country based on voluntary association, a country based on universal ideas, to a pre-Enlightenment civilization, a country based on, rather, the desires of the community, based on, certain ideas of theology, certain religious ideas. For some of these people, that would be based on Catholicism. Other people would be based on the idea of God and more generally. And having a government that intervenes in private life to promote the common good or the greater good. This is the tension within the American right now. It's between sort of communitarianism and individualism. And what we saw here, this idea that we should not instead stop using government in certain ways that have been used by the left, but we should just use them to our own ends, is quite a popular idea. Here is the popular conservative commentator John Doyle saying the exact same thing.
We should do it back to them so that we can survive and, preserve our way of life. Well, if we do it, then when they take power, they're just going to do it back to us. And it's like, okay, well, worst case scenario, we're back at square one. But if there's even a shot that we could maybe turn the ship around, why wouldn't you want to pursue that? And also, it sort of, I think, misunderstands the ends with this. It presupposes that the pendulum is going to swing back, right? Like, they can do all of these things to us. They can use their Department of Justice to target political dissidents. They can use their IRS to drain us financially. And then they kind of have this idea of like, oh, well, they're really going to regret that when we get back in power. It's like they don't want to let you get back in power.
Okay, now here is Aaron McIntyre saying something adjacent to this, but not exactly. So this idea that institutions in the country cannot be neutral, which means they cannot be used in a way that accords to their proper functions, but rather they can only be used in a way that promotes someone's values. So according to this viewpoint, whenever an institution in society exists Someone loses and someone doesn't. Someone's values are promoted and someone's values loses out. Watch this.
You say. I think conservatives are learning a really important lesson that there are no neutral institutions. There never was this neutral marketplace where corporations and educational institutions and media would just play it down the middle. We would be able to section off what these corporations do from their values. And because the conservative movement treated these things as two separate places, two separate marketplaces where neutrality could exist, the left was able to infiltrate all of these places with their values because there is no neutral space. And now those values are deeply entrenched.
Now, in these two clips, we have a sort of similar kind of thinking. And this thinking goes like this. It's that we see the corruption of institutions. We see the corruption of power. And both of those two things promote us as conservatives or people on the right in America to pursue a means to not stop them, but use them against our enemies to crush them. My friends, this is simply mere emotion, primal emotion rising up and overtaking our reason, overtaking our proper understanding of politics, and compromising us morally. We have to understand, my friends, as many have pointed out, that if you use the same tools that your opponents use against them, you become no better than them. Now, the problem is a lot of people in my camp stop at this argument. They say, well, we'll become just like the left, and that's a bad thing. Okay, well, you guys, you need to upgrade yourself. I'm sorry, because we are not going to win with this argument. Because the response to that argument, like Doyle said, is very simple. Well, what they're doing works. The response to that argument is not one thought out, conceived on morally consistent basis, rooted in philosophy or first principles. It is instead an emotional response to the decay of society. And the broader argument is this, my friends. This sort of laissez-faire mentality on the right, this sort of hands-off, live and let live mentality on the right has been what the left has used to hijack and then get into societal institutions, infiltrate them, and introduce the decay we see right now, whether it be with the assault on womanhood, whether it be with the debate over, bathrooms, whether it be with the, whatever issue, the teaching of certain race ideologies in schools across America. The left has used conservatism's lax, freedom-based attitude to infiltrate and destroy, and therefore the attitude is bad. That's the argument. Now, of course, this argument, while it is only half true in the sense that it is correct that conservatism for the past few decades has embraced a laissez-faire attitude when it comes to social issues and has been more proactive on the economic front, it's not true that if someone misuses a concept, the concept itself becomes bad. If I use my freedom to go out and get drunk and to be promiscuous and I ended up catching STDs, or I end up having a scoliosis of the liver because my drinking habits got the best of me, does that mean that freedom is bad? No, that simply means that I was irresponsible. These political prescriptions that seek for us to use power in an immoral way, or seek for us to squash freedom because there are some people who are not responsible enough with their freedom, are the same ideas which hold humanity in contempt when people act beyond what they want people to act beyond. The truth is, virtue can only be pursued if people have the ability to act. And you can only hold a man accountable for his actions if he is responsible for them. And the only way man can be morally responsible for his actions is if he has the ability to rationally and freely choose them. Whenever you try to use power or use coercion to make people do what you want to do, or make the course of events go your way, you are acting against A, the proper natural order of things, and you are therefore bound to reach a chaotic and unproductive end, and B, you are completely and utterly missing the point of what political power is supposed to be used for. Political power is not meant to be this game, this conflict of who crushes who. This is not Call of Duty. This is not Modern Warfare 2. This is not Grand Theft Auto. Political power is very simply meant to tend to the needs of the governed on the basis of the first principle constraints that power was conceived of in the first place. That is, the consent of the governed, natural rights, natural law. These moral parameters are meant to guide political power and restrict it to the smallest of the smallest areas of life. Now, the problem has been this. The problem is not runaway classical liberalism, which has asserted freedom of the individual, therefore allowing cultural rot to set in. That's not the problem, my friends. The problem is you have had people pushing against the idea of freedom by using their own freedom to advocate for bad ideas and then getting those ideas in power and then chipping away at the foundations of our republic and chipping away at American conservatism. For a great example of this is actually what happened during the pandemic. Do all of you know that lockdowns and social distancing were actually drafted up by the intelligence community, and these were not organic recommendations from the so-called experts? In fact, the expert class and the intelligence community worked hand in hand to produce the scripts that many of us played out and lived out during the treacherous COVID lockdowns that not only racked America, but racked the world. The Brownstein Institute put out a great paper that I will link in the comment section down below and in the description down below that explains this. You cannot ignore the relationship between power, the perverse use of political power in culture, if you want to actually diagnose the true culprit of our cultural ills. The true culprit of our cultural ills is not freedom. The true culprit of our cultural ills is not free will. The true culprit of our cultural ills is not letting people become responsible for their own actions. The true culprit for our cultural ills are subversive people who act against morally righteous concepts and then by doing so engineer the culture in their direction, and then by doing so also create conflict and make politics a game of mere conflict and power. These so-called post-liberals, people who seek to move beyond the emphasis on the individual and the rights emphasis on general emphasis on liberty and on voluntary association and consent, people like Connor Tomlinson, people like Josh Hammer, people like Yuval Noah Harari, people like Yoram Hazony, and of course, these people are very different. They're all very different shades of post-liberal, right? Not all post-liberals are the same, but generally they all agree that the idea of classical liberalism, which enabled the first 60 years of American conservatism, has failed to produce a morally virtuous society. Therefore, it needs to be abandoned. They all agree, but for different reasons. Harari is a transhumanist, and he's a psychopath. So different reason. Josh Hammer is more of a traditionalistic Catholic type, common good conservative. He wants to have a kind of conservatism centered around the community and the collective as opposed to the individual. Yoram Hazony is much more of a nation state type guy. Connor Tomlinson is much more of also a Catholic type guy. And I know some of these people, by the way, and they're not bad people whatsoever. I'm not trying to attack them personally. I know some of them. I've talked to some of them. They're not terrible people. Harari is, but everyone else, they're not terrible people. But they're fundamentally flawed in their moral thinking. They are children in their moral thinking because they cannot separate the use of freedom with the value of freedom. Let me say that again. They cannot separate people who wish to use the left's tools against them, people who wish to abandon moral premises to pursue ends to win, have not yet learned to separate the use of freedom with the value of freedom. The value of freedom is eternal, it is universal, and it is self-evident. Man cannot act or live in any type of way if he is free, if he's not free. But the use of freedom is so multivariate and so complex that it may not always lead us to the conclusions that we want. And that's okay, my friends. We have to use that same tool which enables us to be either stewards of moral responsibility or stewards of vice to be stewards of, you guessed it, moral responsibility. And any attempt to blame that concept for the failings of human beings is an attempt to misplace man's inherent flaws, his inherent flawed nature, upon the very thing that allows him to escape his flawed nature. No, we don't need to begin prosecuting Democrats or leftists because the current leftist deep state does the same thing. Because we don't believe in politics being a Marxian power struggle where one class of people overrides the other and crush them. And it's an anti-human idea. It's an idea that destroys the very basis of society, which is justice. We believe, conservatives generally believe, in the idea of justice, that contracts and oaths are safeguarded by this principle, that interpersonal relationships are protected by this principle, that the rights of other people are protected by this principle. That does not go away because it's not politically advantageous to us. In fact, if we were smart, we would demand justice rain down upon the leftists, who over the past 120 years have, and even more, but that's when the progressive era roughly started as the posting of this video, over the past 120 plus years have used the judicial system, have used the media, have used the government, have used so many levers of power to bend American society to their whim. We would be demanding justice rain down and correct all those offenses, and then, proportionate to the actions, also correct those who committed those offenses through proper punishment. That's what we would be demanding. Not mere vengeance, not personal grievances, not the primal emotions that this perversion of politics that we all live in, that we all see play out on the stage, this wild circus, this clown world. We would not be trying to make sure that stays alive. Unfortunately, the Josh Hammers of the world, all these people, they seem to want to simply ignore these foundational principles and pursue a game of mere passion. A game of mere passion that does not leave us on a better moral path than what we were on before. My friends, don't become the enemy. Don't become the enemy. The enemy's tactics may work, but they only work in destroying. They don't work in creating, they don't work in renewing, and they don't work in edifying. What does fruit do? Fruit replenishes you. It satisfies your nutritional needs. We need, on the right in America, intellectual fruit. Fruit that may not leave us feeling all excited and passionate, but will leave our minds fulfilled, and therefore allow our actions to be accorded towards our higher nature as human beings, not our lower passions as beasts. And anyone who says that it's okay to crush your enemies because they crush you clearly is attuned to their lower passions. Don't crush your enemies because they crush you. Don't mistreat your enemies because they mistreat you. Ensure your enemy gets what they deserve by using universal principles that go beyond your mere interests to correct their behavior. If that means crushing, okay. But if that means some other form of correction, be open to that and abide by that. Because those kind of standards are more perfect and higher than us as human beings. And we can access these through reason. So now, don't use the enemy's tools to fight the enemy. Use justice and use righteousness to overcome the enemy and any construct of their foul premises. My friend, love you guys so much. If you love me, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.